The waiter set the black leather folder on the table, and I didn't even look at the total. I just slid my card into it, snapped it shut, and kept talking, laughing, playing the part of a guy who had it all figured out. "I'm sorry, sir. It's declined." 12 feet away, my girlfriend's father set his wine glass down slowly. The table went silent, and in that exact second, 6 months of secrets came crashing down at once, and I still didn't know how bad it was about to get. I remember laughing it off first. That nervous laugh you do when your body knows something your mouth hasn't caught up to yet. "Weird," I said. "Must be a fraud alert. Let me try the other one." I reached into my wallet like a magician pulling out a second trick, except this time my hands weren't steady. Emily's mom, Diane, was mid-sentence about her garden when the waiter walked back over, and she stopped talking, watching me the way you watch someone slip on ice, half wincing before it even happens. I handed him the second card, confident smile, chest out, like confidence alone could make the numbers work. He came back faster this time. "This one's also declined, sir." No apology in his voice now, just a fact, delivered flat, in front of everyone I was trying to impress. Emily's dad, Robert, cleared his throat and reached for his own wallet, and that was somehow worse than the decline itself. That was the moment I understood shame has a temperature. Mine was rising through my collar, my ears, the back of my neck, while 4 people at that table pretended not to notice a 28-year-old man quietly falling apart over a $140 dinner. Diane tried to smooth it over, the way good mothers do. "Oh, these machines are always glitching, honey. Happened to us last week at the bank." She was lying to protect me, and somehow that was worse than if she'd said nothing at all. Robert didn't lie. He just quietly waved the waiter over, said, "Put it on this one," and slid his own card across the table like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he did this for his daughter's boyfriend every week. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow the whole restaurant. Emily grabbed my hand under the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I stared at the tablecloth, at the little wine stain shaped like Florida, and I thought about how 3 hours earlier I had told her parents I was doing really well at work, how I'd ordered the second appetizer like it was nothing, how I had spent the entire dinner performing a version of my life that had stopped being true months ago, and I hadn't even noticed the exact day it stopped being true. That's the part nobody warns you about. You don't fall off a cliff. You walk off it so slowly, you convince yourself you're still on solid ground. 6 months earlier, none of this would have made sense to me. 6 months earlier, I had a good job, a decent apartment, and just enough money to feel like an adult who had things handled. I remember getting my first real raise and taking Emily to dinner to celebrate. No anxiety, no math running in the back of my head, just 2 people enjoying a Friday evening. I upgraded my phone that month because why not? I could afford it. I started ordering takeout twice a week instead of once. Told myself it was because I was too busy, which was true, but also just an excuse I liked the sound of. I remember the exact night we signed the lease on the new apartment, the one with the balcony and the in-unit laundry that cost $300 more a month than the place we'd been happy in for 2 years. Emily asked me, half joking, "Are we sure about this?" And I laughed and said, "We only live once, right? We can handle it." I believed that completely. I wasn't lying to her. I was lying to myself first, and she was just the second person to hear it. It didn't feel reckless. That's what nobody tells you about lifestyle inflation. It feels like growth. Every small upgrade felt earned. A better apartment because I deserved better. A gym membership because self-improvement matters. A weekend trip with the guys because life is short. None of it felt like danger. It felt like becoming the person I always pictured myself turning into. The guy who didn't have to check his balance before ordering a second drink. Then the credit card offer came in the mail. 0% APR for 18 months. And I remember thinking, this is basically free money if I'm smart about it. I used it for a new laptop. Then flights for a trip with Emily. Then, without really deciding to, I started using it for groceries too, just to keep cash available. Except the cash I was keeping available kept disappearing into things I couldn't explain later. A buy now, pay later plan for a jacket I wore twice.
$4 here, $9 there, subscriptions I forgot I even had, stacking quietly in the background of my bank statement, like static I'd trained myself not to hear. I did the math on those subscriptions later, after everything fell apart, and it came out to almost $90 a month for things I'd genuinely forgotten I was paying for. A meal kit service I'd used twice, a streaming platform for a show I finished in a weekend and never opened again, a workout app I downloaded during a New Year's burst of motivation that lasted exactly 9 days. None of them felt dangerous individually. That was the trick of it. $9 here, $14 there, invisible little leaks in a boat I kept insisting was fine. Then it got worse in a way I didn't clock at the time. My friend Marcus bought a new car. Another friend, Devin, posted from Cancun, and some part of my brain, the part that measures myself against everyone I know, decided I couldn't be the guy falling behind. So I said yes to the golf trip I couldn't afford. I split a birthday dinner 4 ways that should have been split 6. I told myself these were investments in my relationships, in my image, in the life I was building, when really I was just borrowing from a future version of myself who I assumed would somehow have more money than I did right now. He never did. He had less because I kept taking from him. I remember standing in a parking lot with Marcus after he showed me around his new car, running my hand along the hood, saying all the right things, "Man, this is beautiful," while doing silent math in my head about my own credit utilization. That night, I opened a shopping app I'd promised myself I'd deleted and bought a jacket I didn't need, paid in 4 easy installments, because buying something, anything, felt like the only way to quiet the specific ache of watching someone else's life look easier than mine. I wore that jacket twice. It's still in my closet with the tags cut off and nothing else attached to it. No memory worth the money, just proof of how a bad feeling can talk you into a decision your bank account can't afford. I wish someone had stopped me right there. Nobody did, because nobody knew. I was the friend who always picked up the check, who always had a new pair of shoes, who seemed from the outside like the guy who had it together. Meanwhile, my minimum payments were creeping upward every single month, and I had started a private, humiliating habit, opening my banking app late at night, seeing a number that scared me, and closing it without reading past the first digit. I told myself I'd deal with it next paycheck. Next paycheck became next month. Next month became a pattern I didn't have a name for yet. That wasn't even the biggest mistake. The biggest mistake was the day I stopped opening my mail. Statements piled up on my kitchen counter, unopened, like if I didn't see the number, it didn't exist yet. I started avoiding calls from numbers I didn't recognize. My phone would buzz, an 800 number, and my stomach would drop before I even looked at the screen, because some primitive part of me already knew who it was and what they wanted. Then my phone rang one night when I was lying in bed, wide awake at 2 a.m., which had become normal for me by then. I let it go to voicemail. I always let it go to voicemail. The next morning, I listened to it in the parking lot before work, sitting in my car with the engine off, and a calm, practiced voice told me my account was 60 days past due and that this call may be recorded for collections purposes. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I didn't cry. I just felt this heavy, hollow stillness, like my body had quietly decided to stop reacting because reacting hadn't fixed anything so far. There was a Tuesday at work when an unknown number called while I was in a meeting, and I watched it light up my phone screen face down on the conference table, my heart hammering so hard I sure my coworker next to me could hear it. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the stall door, and just stood there breathing until my hands stopped shaking. I told my manager I wasn't feeling well and went home early. I wasn't sick, not in any way a doctor could have written down anyway. That became my life for a while. Insomnia that wasn't dramatic, just a slow, grinding inability to fully rest, because some part of my brain was always doing math in the background. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., and instead of falling back asleep, I'd lie there calculating whether I could make it to the 15th if I skipped a few things. I stopped checking my mail at all. I told Emily everything was fine any time she asked if something was wrong, and every time I said it, I hated myself a little more, because I could see in her face that she almost believed me, and I was the one.
That necessary. Emily asked me once, lying next to me in the dark, why I kept checking my phone at 2 a.m. instead of sleeping. I told her I was just reading the news, which is the kind of lie that's technically not a lie, but isn't the truth either. She let it go that night. I don't think she believed me, but she let it go. And I hated myself a little for how easy it was to fool the person who knew me best simply because she wanted to trust me. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my closest friend, not even myself, really, not in any honest way. I just kept showing up to dinners and golf trips and birthday parties, smiling, paying with cards that were quietly maxing out one by one, because stopping would have meant admitting it, and admitting it felt more frightening than the debt itself. Which brings us back to that restaurant, back to Robert quietly paying for a dinner I was supposed to be hosting, back to Diane's kind, careful silence, back to Emily's hand still holding mine under the table, like she already knew more than she was letting on. Because she did. She'd noticed the late-night phone checking. She'd noticed me flinching at unknown numbers. She just hadn't said anything, waiting, I think, for me to trust her enough to say it first. In the car afterwards, in the parking lot, under a streetlight that buzzed every few seconds, I finally told her everything. The cards, the minimum payments that weren't enough anymore, the unopened mail, the collection calls I'd been dodging for 2 months. I expected her to be angry. I expected her to look at me differently, the way I'd been terrified she would since the moment that first card got declined. Instead, she just asked one question. Why didn't you tell me? And I didn't have a good answer, except that shame convinces you silence is safer than honesty, when it's actually the exact opposite. I thought you'd think less of me, I finally said, staring at the steering wheel instead of at her. I thought if you knew how bad it actually was, you'd start seeing me differently, like I wasn't the guy you thought you were with. She was quiet for a second, and then she said something I still think about. I already knew something was wrong. Watching you pretend for 6 months was so much worse than whatever the number actually is. That sentence landed harder than the decline itself had. I'd spent months protecting her from a truth she'd already half figured out, and all that protecting had done was make her feel shut out of my life at the exact moment she wanted to help carry it. We sat in that car for almost an hour, the streetlight buzzing above us, and for the first time in months I felt something close to relief instead of dread. That night was rock bottom, but it was also, strangely, the beginning of the only thing that actually worked, telling the truth out loud to one other person. The next weekend we sat at my kitchen table with every statement I'd been avoiding for months, actually opened, actually read, actually added up. The number was worse than I'd imagined, and also smaller than the version I'd built up in my head at 3 a.m. That's the strange thing about financial fear. The imagined number is almost always heavier than the real one, because fear doesn't do math, it just multiplies. Recovery wasn't a montage. There was no lucky break, no bonus check, no dramatic turnaround. It was slow and, honestly, kind of boring, in the way real progress usually is. I cancelled 4 subscriptions I'd forgotten I even had. I sold the golf clubs I'd used exactly twice. I called my card companies, embarrassed, and asked about payment plans, and it turned out most of them were more willing to work with me than my anxiety had ever let me believe. I started tracking every dollar in a plain spreadsheet, no fancy app, just numbers I could actually see instead of avoid. I sold my golf clubs on a Sunday morning to a stranger who haggled me down $20, and instead of feeling embarrassed handing them over in a parking lot, I felt lighter, like I'd traded a piece of my old performance for a small piece of my actual life back. I sold a watch I'd bought to look successful and never really liked. I picked up a few freelance hours on weekends, nothing glamorous, just extra money that went straight to the smallest balance first, because Emily had read somewhere that knocking out the small ones builds momentum, and she was right. The first time I paid off an entire card, I didn't celebrate with a dinner out. We stayed in, ordered the cheapest pizza on the menu, and it tasted better than anything I'd eaten at that restaurant 6 months earlier. Some months I paid down more than others. Some months felt like standing still.
I stopped comparing my progress to Marcus's new car or Devin's vacation photos because their highlight reel had never once shown me their bank balance, only mine had ever been real to me. It took 11 months to get back to zero on the smaller card, and I'm still working on the rest. I'm not rich, I don't have some dramatic success story with a neat bow on it. What I do have is $300 sitting quietly in an emergency fund that used to be zero, and a habit of actually opening my mail the day it arrives, which sounds small until you've lived the alternative. What I have is Emily, still here, who I now tell things to before they become emergencies, instead of after. What I have is a version of myself who finally understands that looking like you have it together and actually having it together are two completely different, sometimes opposite things. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever avoided your banking app or laughed off a decline that wasn't actually funny, you're not as alone in this as it feels at 3 a.m. If you want more honest stories like this one, stories about the mistakes nobody posts about, stick around and subscribe, because next time I'm telling you about the biggest lie I ever told about my salary and how it almost cost me everything.